Hello, welcome to part 2 of our third tutorial, Register Database. So, after registering the first database in IB Expert, let's take a look at the other options and parameters the database registration has to offer. By right-clicking on my registered database, I can open the Database Registration Info. The font character set is important. You can select the character set appropriate for the language and characters you wish to be displayed on your screen. The ANSI character set covers most characters. One feature of the more recent IB Expert versions is the possibility to automatically convert characters and symbols between UTF-8 and local input. You can activate or deactivate this feature here as wished. On Windows, it is possible to work with the so-called trusted authentication, which means you can save entering your username each time you wish to connect to the server and let your Windows logging be passed on to the Firebird server. And here you can add further connection parameters if wished. On the second page, you can specify whether you wish system tables to be displayed in the Database Explorer and in the performance analysis. This can be particularly interesting when working on more complex databases. Trim char fields in grids. This trims character fields on the right and left, removing any empty spaces. Autocommit Transactions is for those of you who don't wish to commit each transaction explicitly. However, this option should not be activated without careful thought, as you do not have the chance to reconsider whether you should perhaps roll back a transaction and check it again. You can specify that this database should automatically be opened each time you start IB Expert. Practical when you generally only work on one particular database. And here you can specify that IB Expert always asks for your username and password when connecting to the database. Otherwise, IB Expert only requests this information if you have not entered anything here. This option is for database connections running across a relatively slow line. For example, if you are on a web server installed somewhere on the internet where your Firebird server is running, and the connection between the server and client is relatively slow, then you can activate the Metadata Cache, which stores all object descriptions and other information which IB Expert normally loads each time it starts or each time the database is opened locally. This option speeds up work considerably. You can deactivate the plan request, the query requesting which index sequence is used by the Sql Editor. This also speeds up query times, however you do lose important information. The performance analysis can also be deactivated. With the performance analysis, you can study, for example, how many operations such as insert, update, delete or select statements have been performed on which tables. Object descriptions can also be deactivated, so that you do not always have an automatic database access just because your mouse travels over something connected with it. The metadata changes counter will appear down here in a minute. This parameter is displayed by IB Expert so that you can see when you have made 255 metadata alterations to a database object. 255 is the maximum number of alterations allowed at runtime. When you have reached this number, it is necessary to perform a database backup and restore so that you can then make further alterations. This is a minor limitation compared to the advantage of being able to make metadata changes whilst the system is up and running. You can even add new fields while other users are actively working on the database. There aren't many databases around that can do that, particularly to the level of quality that Firebird offers. The so-called poll interval checks all specified database connections by sending a command every X number of seconds, so that the database connection is kept open. Sometimes certain routers disconnect databases in the TCP/IP protocol if the database connection is inactive, and then later try to reconnect them. This can cause the error message, "Connection lost to database." And this feature prevents this happening. On the DB Explorer page, you can specify what you wish to see on the left here. Whether you wish to view the system tables. The same applies for system-generated domains. Domains are user-defined data types. Triggers, these are active program modules executed automatically in the database and which also exist at system level. System indices or the object details. I always activate this. Then you can see here in the tree structure, underneath the table objects, that the field objects are displayed. On the next page, there is the possibility to define the number of SQLs stored in the SQL Editor history. The default value is 100. That means IB Expert stores the last 100 SQLs for this database. The next point allows you to define whether you wish to use the update command instead of the describe command when extracting metadata. The describe command was introduced in Firebird 2.0, which means if you need to extract metadata from a Firebird 2 version in order to create a Firebird 1.5 database, then you can't use the describe command for object descriptions. IB Expert automates this for you. You can also define log files with a timestamp if wished. If you activate the log file here, you can specify where it should be stored, and all metadata alterations will be logged here, whether it's a create table command in an SQL window or whether you compose your tables interactively. All metadata changes are logged in this file. Similar applies to the SQL Editor. Here you can specify whether select, insert, update or delete commands, execute commands, other statements or only valid statements should be logged. This last option should be checked, as it doesn't make much sense to log invalid statements. And again, similar attributes can be specified for the script executive. The SQL Editor is for single commands and blocks. The script executive can execute multiple commands simultaneously, and these can be logged here if wished. For the backups and restores for this database, you can specify here where the backup file should be stored. Then, using the Services menu, you have direct access to this backup file, both when backing up and restoring this database. Here you can define further parameters as standard. I like to see the protocol on screen. The verbose parameter is the actual protocol. I always leave the garbage collection active and the format as transportable, so that I can restore to other platforms if necessary, for example between Windows and Linux. I'll leave all other options as they are, but important, you should be very careful with the option Backup Metadata Only. When you use this option to back up a database, you end up with a copy of your metadata, but not the data. Accidentally restore this over your existing database and you've lost all your data. I will not activate the commit after each table at the moment, as this is only necessary if I'm having problems backing up my database. For the database restore, I will check Replace Existing Database. Again, I want to follow the restore on screen. The page size is usually specified when creating the database. You can, however, redefine this when restoring. If you have no good reason for not doing so, I recommend you use a page size of 16K when working with Firebird 2.1 or higher. Page sizes smaller than 4K no longer work with Firebird 2 anyway. Default paths. Where should the files be stored? For metadata extract, for extraction into separate files, export files, as well as the quick save path, parameter path, and HTML reports. Explorer filters. Here I can specify that certain filters are set in the Database Explorer. For example, so that certain objects with certain names are not displayed at all. Scripts. Here I can specify information for scripts. For example, I can create a before connect script that automatically performs a database backup so that I always have a copy of the database at the time I connected to it. After connect, before disconnect, and after disconnect are also available. You can store your scripts in the IB Expert IB block language here. There will be a separate tutorial about IB blocks at a later stage. The default setting for transactions is read committed for both data and metadata. These definitions can be altered in another way, but more about that in a separate tutorial. The comparative database. If you're using this database, for example, as your development database, because the production database is constantly in use, and you compare metadata regularly to update the production database, then you can specify the second production database, which is the counterpart of this database, here. And finally, the color mark is a helpful way to distinguish between databases. For example, here I will define my development database with a green bar on top of the window. When I open any windows appertaining to this database, I can immediately recognize that this is the editor for my development database, which I can use to test and experiment. I could then define the color mark for my production database with a thick red line, so that I can immediately recognize that I need to be more careful with that one. We hope this tutorial has been of help to you and look forward to presenting our next subject, database objects. Goodbye for now from all of us at IB Expert.